Hi, everyone. How's everyone doing? Okay, I'm a little short, so I'm going to do this. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit of a pulse of the room because I took a train-in this morning and I missed the first session, so if this has already happened, you'll have to excuse me. So how many of you work for development/fundraising partnership departments at a nonprofit? Okay. How many of you are students who want to get into the space? Okay. So how many of you work on the for-profit side of the brand? Okay. So how many of you are agency/consulting? Aha. Got it. So for the agency folks, this is old news for you. Excellent. Okay. So I want to thank Jen for inviting me to be here. And when she first sort of brought this up, this idea of talking at the Cause Marketing Summit, I thought that I could maybe spend a little bit of time talking about my lessons learned, particularly in the nonprofit space, a little bit in the for-profit space, and even in the some-profit space that I've been in throughout my career. But specifically what I want to focus on is some of the integrated marketing campaigns that are coming out of nonprofits these days, which I think are some of the most innovative and creative sort of types of media that we're seeing in the marketplace. And I specifically want to talk about those integrated go-to-market campaigns and the lessons that we've learned from the UN Foundation perspective in having those campaigns out there, particularly as it relates to creating brands, cause brands that sell, and creating assets that you can sell, and then how to make those scalable over time. So to start off with, I don't know if you're familiar with the UN Foundation, but the UN Foundation means many things, and that in itself is our biggest challenge. We are really a foundation which at the core, our purpose is all about connecting partners, connecting ideas, and connecting people to the UN. But the UN stands for a lot of different causes. At the UN Foundation, we have 3 core pillars that we look at from an issue perspective. Energy and climate is one pillar, women and girls is another pillar, global health is our 3rd pillar, and within those pillars, we have all these different issue-based campaigns and ways that we talk about our programs. Because at the end of the day, our job as cause marketers is to make sure that these issues resonate with everybody. It has to resonate with that 13-year-old girl who's fundraising for you from Oklahoma. It has to resonate with that influencer, that mom blogger or that dad blogger who's writing about you. It has to resonate with a celebrity who's willing to talk about you. It has to resonate with a corporate brand who's willing to fund you. So all of this that you see here, this house of brands, is lots and lots of years of work, of market research, of trying to really figure out how to create messages and marketing around UN issues and how to make them relevant to people. What's really interesting, too, about some of these brands that you see up here, they're not all consumer-facing. Some of these brands were actually created so that we could create membership-based organizations around them, like alliances, where different partners could join and have a seat at the table to move the needle on a particular issue, like clean cook stoves, for example. You have brands up there that are really just about Capitol Hill. How do we start moving the needle on Capitol Hill to make sure that more U.S. funding is going to some of the UN programs that we care about? But some of these brands up here are really consumer-facing, and that's the part that I'm going to talk about the most today, particularly in my role at the UN Foundation. So what we're trying to do with some of the issues up here is to tell the story of impact, and ultimately allowing a corporate partner that we pitch to choose, based on these brands, the issues that best resonate with them. But we're not just asking them to choose the issue, we're also asking them to be part of our story of impact. And that goes from start to finish. So all the different assets that we bring to the table as the UN Foundation now become part of that partnership story. And that's really what I want to talk about a little bit today. The other thing I want to talk about when you look at this sort of house of brands is it can get pretty confusing. So what we realized pretty early on in the UN Foundation is that we are not very good at selling ourselves as a branded house. It does not make a lot of sense for partners, influencers, and others to come on board with the entire package of what the UN Foundation does. It's a little bit vague, actually. And the UN itself is such a huge NGO that we also have to be, in sort of our role as the best friend of the UN, we have to be very sensitive to sort of what's out there in the marketplace and the messages that we can actually share for the UN overall. We don't speak on behalf of the UN. So it was really very important for us as we created some of these brands to think about ways that we could actually create partnerships that were very much focused on the issues that the UN needed to be out there in the marketplace. So that's another point that I wanted to bring out as we talk about our branded house and our house of brands. So how many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals? Great. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I think this is really a defining moment for us in terms of how we create the brands that we do at the UN Foundation. It's not easy to choose the issues that we want to get behind, but in some ways for us, we have this amazing guiding set of values or principles that were originally called the Millennium Development Goals and are now called the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm going to share some stories, some of which you may know, some of which you may not know. The Millennium Development Goals, when they were first formed, which was actually the late 1990s, it was around the year 2000 when they first came out, nobody knew about them. There was absolutely no marketing behind them. There is a lot of sort of internal storytelling that there was no real democratic process in choosing what those goals would be. Another big piece of what everyone says when they talk about the Millennium Development Goals is that, those goals were really meant to be a guiding principle for developing countries. It didn't really apply to those of us in the Western Hemisphere. These were for parts of Sub-Saharan Africa and South and Southeast Asia to look at and to say, okay, I need to do these 8 things because the UN has set this as my goal. And in a lot of ways, the MDGs, in that respect, were not really what we wanted to create as a global community together. So when we took a look at the MDGs and asked ourselves the question, were they really successful? There were a couple of factors that we found really worked. And one of those was that the MDGs allowed us to measure collective progress. We'd never done that before as a global community. You have nation states getting involved and essentially saying, I'm going to start to measure my progress towards this goal, and other states doing the same things, and we could start to compare and take a look at collective progress. It also allowed us to create some ownership and accountability around what we were trying to do as a humanitarian community overall, whether it was the work from Oxfam, the work from Save the Children, the work from Results, the work from Médecins Sans Frontières, the work from the UN. We were all working towards these common goals and holding ourselves accountable. And I think the MDGs really allowed us to create some partnerships, some long-lasting partnerships, because you were starting to look at things cross-functionally and starting to look at things across sectors for the first time. So this is why I'm here to say that I love the SDGs. And the reason I love the Sustainable Development Goals is that we took a look at those lessons that we learned from the MDGs and we said, okay, we're not going to let that same stuff happen for the SDGs. We're going to make sure that these new set of goals are inclusive. All 17 of those goals apply to the United States as much as they apply to DRC. We're going to make sure that these goals are cross-cutting. So for example, women and girls issues touch about 5 of those goals. If you take a look at childhood mortality, there's a goal on health and well-being, but there's also a goal on nutrition. You can now start to look across these goals and realize the interconnected nature of everything we're trying to do. So the reason I share these 17 goals with you, which are all about making sure that we create the planet that we want for the people that we believe, for the rights that the people on this planet should have. The reason that I wanted to share this with you is really to truly define how the UN Foundation chooses and sets its issue-based priorities. And sometimes that actually means saying goodbye to brands that we ourselves have created. And this transition from the MDGs to the SDGs, actually, we took a moment to do that. We created some exit strategies for brands that we knew were not important for the next 15 years of the goals that we were setting, or that had lived its life, and actually we had seen tremendous progress in those areas. So if you take a look at the brands that the UN Foundation has created, this is really what we use to tell our 360-degree approach for every brand. I take this in to every pitch meeting I have. So this allows me to talk about the fact that storytelling is in our DNA. We are really all about an integrated approach, and this allows me to talk about the assets we as a foundation have. It also allows me to talk about strange bedfellows. I really like the panel that was up here before me, because one of the things that every single one of those panelists said, regardless of whether they were representing an influencer or a nonprofit, was they were really talking about the fact that there's unlikely advocates and unlikely influencers that come to the table, and sometimes those strange partnerships create the most buzz. And this, to me, is really what the UN Foundation has done remarkably well. Most people do not think of the UN as an easy partner. Let's be honest, this is the largest NGO in the world. It's very bureaucratic. We want to be able to create something that's nimble and honestly sexy, right? We want to make sure that partners want to be engaged with the amazing work that the UN is doing, but in a way that's simple and that's honestly going to give them some marketing power. And this is really what I feel the UN Foundation is so good at doing. So let me ask you all a question. When you go in for your pitch meetings, and this is obviously very much for the nonprofits in the room, but also if there are corporate leaders, this is an interesting question that you can turn around for yourself. Do you go in and lead with the impact of what you're trying to do? So if your issue is cancer, if your issue is, saving a child's life, if your issue is feeding a child, or do you go in leading with your assets? And we're going to keep that question there for just a second, but I think there's some value in us revisiting that at the end of this presentation. So here are some lessons learned that I'd like to share with you with specific case studies on partnerships that we have at the UN Foundation and how we've been able to grow those over time. I'm also going to tell you during the course of these case studies some of the areas where we've tripped up a little bit and had some challenges, and maybe it hasn't always worked the way that we thought it would, but I hope that will be helpful. But for the most part, what I'd like to leave you with this particular slide is always, when you're looking at ways to market your cause brand, make sure that you show your go-to-market strategy, make sure that you do your market research so that when you're walking in there, you have the data necessary to show how well your cause brand is resonating with audiences, and then make sure you keep your third-party endorsement, particularly your influencers and your convening power, as top priorities when you're walking in. So the first lesson that we've learned at the UN Foundation is the best partnerships are actually co-created. A lot of the times we walk in there with an idea, and what we'll notice is the best meetings are the ones where our idea gets shut down. But other ideas come up out of it. So in 2012, June 1st actually of 2012, I walked into Deerfield, Illinois, into Walgreens, which is based there. And I had my deck with all my influencers and all my assets and all of everything that Walgreens could do to save children's lives around the country through immunizations. And that was my pitch to Walgreens. And they looked at it for a little while and they said, well, we give out free flu shots in Nicaragua. What can you do there? And I thought, okay, I don't know that they really got what I'm trying to say here. And so I pulled up a slide, and on that slide, it said, wouldn't it be really great if for every pneumococcal vaccine, which you give to, pneumococcal vaccine is traditionally given in Walgreens pharmacies to people over the age of 55, For every adult that you give a pneumococcal vaccine to, wouldn't it be great if you delivered a pneumococcal vaccine to a child in a developing country? That's a $3.50 vaccine, and it can save a child's life. Pneumococcal pneumonia is actually the leading killer of children in developing countries under the age of 5. And they looked at me for a while and said, yeah, let's go back to the influenza vaccine. What do you think you could do with the influenza vaccine in Laos? So they moved from Nicaragua to Laos, but I still didn't feel like I was really getting that far. I left that meeting with the promise that we would have several follow-up meetings. I didn't hear from them for 6 more months. 6 months later, they called and said, you know, we were talking about your idea on the pneumococcal vaccine, and we think you might have something there. Can you come back in and meet with our marketing team? So I went back in again in January of 2013. And at that point, we saw that they had landed somewhere, and they had started coming up with their own ideas, their own brainstorms. We were not involved. And they started to say, we like this idea of our customers getting a shot and then giving a shot. And for the first time, the light went off in our eyes, in their eyes. It just naturally became a place where we knew we could get somewhere with this. And then the buy-in process began, and we had to have leadership meet, and we had to figure out ways that we could actually make this partnership wholesome, make it authentic, and actually make it work so that it could create impact in the field. The other thing about co-creating partnerships that I want to talk about, and someone else brought this up on the last panel, is when you walk into a room and you're actually pitching these partnerships, or you're actually creating a situation where 2 partners are negotiating something, does it always feel like it's an equal footing? If you're the one asking for money and they're the ones with money, it doesn't always feel like you have the same kind of power. But if you take your assets into that meeting with you, and you take the value of your brand into that meeting with you, I would argue that you're a lot more likely to come away with an equal footing. And there are no power dynamics anymore. I call this the Hugh Jackman effect, because Hugh Jackman's really interesting, right? I mean, he gets behind a lot of different causes, and one of the causes that he gets behind, or has gotten behind the UN Foundation, is clean cook stoves. And he's probably tweeted about clean cook stoves 3 times. But we have Hugh Jackman. And you walk into that room and you just say, you know what? I'm not going to worry about the fact that they have $1 billion in revenue and that I am trying to get these life-saving medicines to children in DRC. I'm just going to go in there and say, but I have Hugh Jackman. And see if that works. So I want to tell you a little bit about Get a Shot, Give a Shot, which launched in 2013, the first year of the partnership. We're moving into year 4, which will launch September 2016. We do this every year during flu season. You walk into any Walgreens or Duane Reade store, and Walgreens will donate a vaccine to a child in need. It'll be a polio or measles vaccine, which goes through the Shot at Life campaign at the UN Foundation to the UN countries in need. Now, this program, at this point, has helped vaccinate 7 million children in the developing world, and in 2016, you'll hear me say 15 million children. The reach is simply phenomenal. We have been able to get into households across America with this particular partnership. We've reached 1 billion American homes through the television ads alone. And this year, we'll also be looking at expansion into other areas, including employee giving, and some of our own champion and grassroots movements are going to get behind it. So I'd like to share this with you because in this second year of the partnership, as we were preparing for year 3, you'll see the true nature of the partnership in this video, where we had a chance to tell our story together for the first time.
If I be big one, I like to be a teacher.
If I grow, I want to be an accountant.
There are huge financial challenges in delivering vaccines to children in Africa. How can you ever afford a vaccine when your daily income is only $2 or $3?
Walgreens has a program called the Get a Shot, Give a Shot program. It's a collaboration between the UN Foundation and the Walgreens company, in which for every vaccine that we administer at our pharmacies, Walgreens will donate a vaccine in an underdeveloped country. Programs like Get a Shot, Give a Shot. It brings life to this country. It brings chances to live.
When I grow up, I want to be a lawyer.
When I grow up, I want to be a doctor.
Walgreens, at the corner of happy and healthy.
The next lesson I want to share is about offering unique assets. This is really interesting coming off of the influencer panel. So in the first few years of developing a cause brand at the UN Foundation, we realized we need a lot more influencers to be able to get the brand out there. So we started to attend blogging conferences. Has anyone ever been to these? Okay. I love blogging conferences. Were so different from my previous life of only attending corporate events. So when I first went to a blogging conference, I thought, okay, there's a lot to be learned here in terms of how to partner with influencers. And one of the things that came out of the blogging conference that I went to in June of 2012, as I was traveling back, I remembered something that one of the speakers had said. And she said, you know, the best thing as a blogger is knowing that people are reading your blog and that they comment on your blog and that they're sharing your blog. Those comments and shares are our currency. And I remembered this thought for a long time because I thought, you know, if we look at all of the bloggers that we work with, and at the time we were probably working with about 10 of these amazing digital partners, every single one of those people represented their own partnership with us. So imagine you as one account manager sitting in a nonprofit trying to manage all these 10 different partners plus the other brands that you also have partnerships with. It was a significant amount of work. So what we tried to do was take a look at a way that we could look at these digital partnerships that we had and create a win-win situation for us. And what we did was in 2012, we came up with the idea of Blogist. Blogist is a relay that happens in the month of August. And what we said to the bloggers were, you guys love our issue areas. You're really good about writing about children's health, about writing about issues around mothers that happen in developing countries. You're really good at writing inspiring stories about these causes. Well, what if we did a blog relay where you get one day in the month of August and you get to write an inspirational story or something, we usually create a theme around that month, or something that resonates with your readership. And for every comment and share that happens of your blog post or of your digital asset that you've created, a donation will be unlocked for UN Foundation programs in that area. So the one thing about bloggers that we learned was that you really have to allow them permission to operate in their own space. It is not really about getting the blogger to do what makes sense for your cause brand. It is really about how can we help the blogging community to drive more readership and also allow them to tell a unique story because they wanted to be able to make an impact. So this is where we then got the corporate brand involved. And we found ourselves in a situation where we were able to talk to several different brands and donors about coming on board as the people that would actually provide the donation. And so in the summer of 2012, we unlocked Blogist, and we announced it at a major blogging conference that was happening this year, and this is what we announced. So I really love Bloggist because it was actually designed very much with the influencer's audience in mind and thinking about ways that the blogging community could engage with a global organization like ours. Bloggist 2012, we had a donor.
Science and tech.
In Bloggist 2012, we actually had a donor come in and say, okay, here's $30,000, and we will be able to unlock donations for Bloggist 2012. And at the time, we thought, $30,000, okay, let's do what we can with that. 2 weeks into Bloggist, we had blown way past that, and we went back to the donor, and he came up with another $200,000 for us to be able to run that program for the rest of the month. By Bloggist 13, we were working with over 60 bloggers on the program, and we got brands involved. We've had Walgreens, Project Perpetual, and this year, 2016, Man Baby, which is a pacifier company, will be behind Bloggist. What's incredible about this program is that we now work with over 90 of the strongest, most influential bloggers in the world because of Bloggist. So we've not only attracted more partnerships from brands, but we've attracted more influencers through this one platform. And the other thing that I think is unique about Bloggist is it's allowed us to expand our own creativity. So the first year we actually looked at just comments and shares, and the second year we started saying, what's going on Instagram? We should probably start including Instagram into some of our Bloggist actions and figuring out ways that we could actually attract that and save even more lives. We are now in a place where our 2015 impact is pretty significant. And this takes me to share my third lesson, which is sharing impact beyond the cause. And I'm going to go really quickly because they're giving me the time signals over here. So all I really want to say about this point is when you get back to your corporate partner or you get back to your influencer partnership and you are actually relaying the impact, you're probably most of the time talking about that young individual who is now cancer-free, or perhaps you're talking about that young puppy who now has a home, or in my case, I might be talking about a young child whose life is now saved. But I really want the impact to go beyond the cause. So start talking in terms that you're familiar with, in marketing terms. What are your KPIs? Exactly what kind of ROI did you get on this investment? And this is an example through our partner Project Perpetual of the kind of results that Bloggist was able to give to them. Somebody made the point, the woman who runs the dating site, about, what do you bring to the table? Well, here's what I bring to the table. This is exactly how I can make a lot happen for your brand, just the way you have to help children around the world. The last point I wanted to make is the last lesson is scaling up through creativity. So Bloggist was pretty interesting because we went out pitching a lot of partners, to see if they would get involved in Bloggist. And in the first year, it was really hard to get a partner, quite frankly. That's why we had the donor come in, because it hadn't happened yet. There was no sort of lesson learned or no kind of history that we could show that this was a successful program. So we went to J&J that year, and they said no. But after the first year of Bloggist and after the success that they saw, J&J approached us, and we started to co-create with them. The Global Partnerships team at the UN Foundation worked very carefully with J&J to create the Global Moms Relay. Sound familiar? Yep. It's essentially Bloggist, but without the bloggers. This time, it's a relay that we create between Mother's Day and Father's Day that involves global influencers. It could be the Prime Minister of Liberia. It could be a celebrity like J-Lo, who participated. Zoe Saldana participated this year. It could be a community leader or an activist who's well known around the world. What's really interesting about J&J's approach is that they're really looking at this not just as a way to reach out to their consumers, who are largely moms, but also as a way to bring all sorts of issues to the table, such as maternal and child health issues, reproductive health issues, issues around children's health, pregnancy, all of that. And this, of course, benefits the UN Foundation programs because, again, for every share that's done, we're able to unlock a donation. But we moved beyond that. We scaled Global Moms Relay up because we saw the convening power before it. A program like Global Moms Relay that has all these incredible writers behind it was begging for some sort of event around it. So we created Moms Plus Social Good. And Moms Plus Social Good is actually an event that happens once a year in New York with J&J and the UN Foundation, bringing together incredible speakers like Jennifer Garner, Samantha Power, and others to talk about the importance of these global issues. So all of a sudden, a win-win for J&J and a win-win for the UN Foundation as well. I think our ability to scale up in this way was really amplified by the fact that we had these internal assets. We understood the stakeholder development piece, we understood the convening power, we understood the scope of our digital influence, but more importantly, the scope of our partners and their influence. And to me, that's really what value our brand has brought to the table. So I think my last sort of piece of advice, if it's advice or even my last lesson learned, I would say, is if you're going into a partnership without knowing the true value of your brand, find out what that is, and you'll find that it could probably move mountains. Thank you.